Unit at the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation at the University of Johannesburg. She holds a political studies doctorate from the University of Johannesburg and a master's in international relations from University of Wits. She teaches Pan-African thoughts and leadership at the honors and master's level and guest lectures in conflict resolution in Africa, critical development studies and research methodology at the postgraduate level. Her research focuses on international relations of technology, the political economy of communication technology and digital diplomacy. She was previously a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Johannesburg, South Africa Research Chair for Africa Diplomacy and Foreign Policy. She has previously worked at the local government level and in South Africa Research Institutes. So today she will be presenting a paper titled Illusions of Inclusion, Fintech in Africa. I'll now hand to you, Odilile, to give us a presentation. Your presentation will be 30 minutes. After that, we'll take questions from participants. Thank you very much.
And thank you. And thank you also to the entire Tairisha team for hosting me today. It's always a great time when you can share an ongoing project and rub minds. So the working paper, Illusions of Inclusion, Fintech in Africa, it's something I've been thinking a lot about. So let me just start with my positionality. I'm a social scientist. I'm not a finance person. I'm not an economist. I'm primarily a political scientist. But what I'm always interested about is how technology plays out for people on the ground. So my PhD was actually looking at mobile telephony and its effects on foreign policy. And as I was doing my readings, I saw the effects of mobile telephony on society at large. So when this whole idea of looking at fintech came along, it came along against the background of this whole huge noise about financial inclusion and how fintech is the go-to for ensuring financial inclusion. And I have to admit, for a large part of the time, I was caught up in the whole technological determinism. I'm like, okay, yeah, this is the way to go. We're going to sort out our communities, not only in South Africa, but across the continent. Technology is the way. But as I looked closer, I realized that all these new technologies obscure the wider issues with the broader digital ecosystems. For instance, we don't really properly talk about issues around accessibility, the availability of digital technologies outside of urban context. So we're not properly looking at what's happening in peri-urban context or in rural context. We don't fully have a nuanced discussion around digital financial inclusion on the continent. Who decides who gets access to these technologies? Is there sufficient infrastructure to ensure that the technologies get deployed everywhere? Are they widely available? Do people understand how to use the technologies that are there? So the umbrella question for my research is, can fintech deliver on its promise of achieving financial inclusion on the African continent? And the other questions I ask are, does fintech really offer financial inclusion for citizens at the bottom of the pyramid? And for this particular paper, it's Southern Africa, but for the wider project, I'm looking at Africa as a whole. And then another question I ask is the political environment on a global and local scale primed towards inclusion for those who are at the base of the pyramid. Now, in terms of data, I took a mixed methods approach, and I leaned very heavily on survey data from Afrobarometer, and the analytical lens that I decided to use is digital political economy. Well, I know a lot of people are like, okay, what's digital political economy? It's pretty new. One of the key proposers for this analytical tool or framework is Professor Milton Muller. And there were other options. I could have said use platform governance. So platform governance looks at decision-making frameworks around digital platforms or information systems. I could have gone with information capitalism, which relates to the commodification of information, or even surveillance capitalism, which is about the commodification of personal data. But the main reason why I didn't use any of those options was because I thought that all these platform governance, surveillance capitalism, and information capitalism only looked at a sliver of the wider political economy, as well as and in terms of exploring the digital ecosystem, I didn't think they were most appropriate. Now, what Milton Muller is proposing is looks more at the relational aspect of markets and states within larger digital ecosystems. Like the digital, how to put it, digital political economy is a tool that would allow us to examine the deployment of digital technologies and how it interfaces with states, firms, and societies. So in other words, similar to classic international political economy, it makes sense of the relationships between economic, society, and politics. For those who are familiar with digital political economy, you would know that there's a lot of, it's very controversial in that there's a feeling that in terms of discussions on internet governance, we can leave it there. We don't necessarily need digital political economy, that it narrows the scope of inquiry. But I take the view that there are benefits to using digital political economy as an instrument to understand the intersection between regional and national public policy, fintech applications for what we're looking at right now, and financial inclusion. The internet and its accompanying digital technologies don't exist in a vacuum. As the paper says, I'm looking at financial inclusion in Southern Africa. The reason why I chose Southern Africa in comparison to, let's say, West Africa or even East Africa was that in terms of digital financial inclusion, but especially financial inclusion, Southern Africa is still behind, despite the fact that in the middle of everything, we have South Africa as a powerhouse in terms of financial inclusion, in terms of increasing digital technologies. Now there's many reasons for the low penetration rate in Southern Africa. And I argue part of the reason is we're not very, we don't really look at how people see banking technology. We don't look at what's happening in peri-urban and urban locales. We don't care much about what's happening in culture. The development of fintech products such as mobile money, we've seen in West Africa and East Africa, it's become a very big thing, but mobile money hasn't taken off in the same way in Southern Africa, which is quite unfortunate because the development of mobile money has allowed for the evolution of other development technologies such as pay-as-you-go electricity provision. We think of M-Pesa and the creation of M-Kopa. And there's also pay-as-you-go gas, which is being blighted right now. But, when we bring that down to Southern Africa, we're not really seeing that necessarily available amongst our poorest community. And then if we're going down to financial inclusion itself, in terms of availability of banks, most people in particularly rural areas don't have access to banks. And even when they have easy access to banks, they're very hesitant to use them for a number of reasons. Like within South Africa, we remember the fall of many rural type banks, including Sambo. And, if you think about the rest of Southern Africa, in Malawi and in Zambia and Zimbabwe, there's 101 repetitions of the same failures in the provision of rural banking, but even how the rural banks works. So basically, rural communities have gotten the short end of the stick when it comes to developing banking services for them. And often banks are too far away, and there are other external pressures that prevent rural residents from using banking services. There are considerations such as cultural preferences. In many rural communities, they prefer informal savings clubs, such as stokvels, and a lot of banks operate at very inconvenient times. They're opening at a time when rural workers are actually, doing their job. So how are you supposed to make use of banking services if you're not considered in terms of the times that the banks open? Additionally, low-income banks, particularly in peri-urban and rural settings, have been negatively affected by bank failure rates. So in South Africa alone, over 13 banks have closed since 1990. So I mentioned Sambo, we remember the VBS Mutual Bank, African Bank, and all of these banks are banks that target poor communities, peri-urban, rural communities. And if we look at why they failed, it's poor management, not a lot of interest from the policy environment, and liquidity. Now, because there's been more attention towards digital financial inclusion, there's been a look at, okay, how else can we essentially make money from rural communities? And then also there's this national and international policy pressure. And then we think about as social grants have, or particularly in the South African context, how social grants have injected money into rural communities at a scale that we haven't ever seen before. So the money flowing within informal savings clubs or stokvels, has increased, and organizations and including banks have seen, okay, well, look, there's a lot of money to be made. So like, for example, Finmark Trust points out that 1 in 3 rural households do have a specialized savings account created by legacy financial institutions. But for poor people, this is not a popular option because of the cost of traveling to actually access those legacy savings accounts. Now, Finmark Trust estimated that that there would be over 80% of the community, rather South Africa's financial inclusion rate will reach over 80%, which it actually has as of last year. But the number of people engaged in stokvels has actually increased. Now, what this speaks to me is that it speaks to the cultural and community aspects regarding money. And it illustrates that there needs to be a fundamental rethink about how financial products are offered in urban and peri-urban settings. And this is on the traditional way of designing it, but also when we're thinking about designing digital products, including potentially digital stokvels. And I'm not going to go too much into the other socio-cultural aspects of money. But like any person from, and this is not just in Southern Africa, but if you're in West Africa, let's say you're getting married, for people to enter the door to have negotiations, money has to be dropped. How does that work when you're having to send an e-wallet, for example? And, it doesn't have this same imbibed cultural aspects into it. So I'm going to quickly go through the dangers of digital payments and digital money. I have in big letters on the screen the CPS case. I don't know if a lot of people, especially those who are not in South Africa, know about the cash payment masters. They were the previous intermediaries for the social grant system. So they're the ones who paid it. And how they got the contract was promising financial inclusion and promising a bank account, and they gave everybody, and this particularly people in peri-urban settings and rural settings, cards, which they didn't understand how to use, and all the payments were electronic. Now, the problem, and it just speaks to the problem of digital evangelism, is that it prevents closer scrutiny of the behaviors of the service providers. Within this whole idea of fintech philanthropy, or the development complex, as Pascal describes it, we have to start looking at the companies that come in as the supposed savior of the poor, including the rural poor. And scholars and practitioners, and that's us, must be cautious about the implications of these technologies being rolled out. So in the CPS case, like I said, they created bank accounts for grantees as evidence of accomplishing financial inclusion. But at the same time, they had all this information, and they gave people loans and all kinds of other financial products that they did not understand, they couldn't afford, and they ended up in a worse financial position than they actually started with. And it took civil society taking the government and CPS to court to ensure that this comes to an end. And the Constitutional Court was quite damning on CPS with regards to this supposed account that people got. But if you look at the various digital payment programs, like even the most well-touted M-Pesa in Kenya, the amount of exploitation that is actually built into the system is not something that a lot of people thought or addressed. Like part of the problem, for example, in the M-Pesa case, when M-Pesa was created, it was created it was a loan product. That was what it was. It was not initially created as a payment-to-payment product, and then adjusting it didn't necessarily take out what is arguably well, depends on what side of the spectrum you're sitting on, but what I would say are exploitative practices. Overall areas of exclusion, which a lot of people, I didn't necessarily touch on it in my paper, but it's something that's important to point out, is infrastructure. In rural areas particularly, but also peri-urban areas, the nature of the infrastructure available is it's so poor that the quality of devices that are available to people doesn't means that they don't have necessarily the access to what is the best form of technology. And I would argue that with the way things are moving so slow, if you're going to be rolling out digital payments or even digital savings, like Okakame, the last time we spoke, and it's been something that's been rolling in my head, it's like, why do we offer poor people ways to spend their money, but we don't offer them ways to save their money, particularly on digital platforms? And if you're going to now start developing products for the rural poor to improve their lives, we have to have savings products. We have to have ways they can spend money. We have to think about how do they spend money culturally, but at the same time, through all of this, because of the infrastructure, we have to think about how can they do that easily instead of having to sit and wait until some company decides to come and build or put in new lines for them, or the satellite companies start saying, okay, well, we'll beam Starlink into your area. Another area of exclusion is digital literacy, including privacy concerns. Now, with the whole CPS, what was very instructive for me was the fact that most of the people didn't understand their rights around their data being moved, about how to use the products, around their privacy. There was none of that. And so if you're going to be developing products for people, particularly for the poor, and it's going to be inclusive, and we also need a degree of agility. You have to always still, particularly for an African context, protect the people who are the most vulnerable. Another area is language barriers. A lot of these products are built in English. How many people speak English? And things that are not built in English, do the people who it's geared to, are they able to use it, or do they have to, for example, as a grandmother, you're going to have to call in a son-in-law or your grandson to come and make use of the data, or make use of the technology to move or make payments for you or accept savings for you. That means there's a lot of trust that is needed. And especially in rural settings, the people who have access to phones, for example, because mobile money is the main product, the people who have access to phones is usually either a man, So he's operating for the family or the village chief. How do you call that inclusion if people don't have agency around their own money? And then, something that I've touched on a lot is in terms of, thinking about how to design products that speak to people's culture. So how you can fix this is, thinking about design, which I keep touching on, and not just design of the products, but also in terms of design of the policy. It should always be accessibility driven. We should think about localization, create products and create policies that speak to the local context. And also think about the areas we're deploying. We can't just ignore, for example, the rural areas. And in most countries, particularly in South Africa, most people actually live in rural communities. So we're just writing them off because they don't necessarily have land tenure. So meaning that they're not people that you can actually necessarily give a loan to. Is that correct? And do we really want to be giving people or focusing on people giving people loans? Surely we should be giving people access to savings and access to actually financial information so that they don't necessarily have to stay poor just because they live in a rural area. And I think I've pretty much covered everything in my paper, and I'm open to questions, discussions, and ideas on how to improve it. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I think it's time to invite colleagues to comment on the paper. So we'll start with people who are online. You can raise your hand, and then we will give you the platform if you have some questions, suggestions, or anything that you want to say to the presenter.
Please do say something. The paper needs to be improved. Thank you. She told me it's perfect.
Oh, okay. So you are saying perfect. Okay.
I can ask something maybe.
Oh, no, please go ahead.
I just wanted to reflect and maybe we did cover this. What is the current situation in South Africa? I'm sure it's different from community to community. But in terms of how many rural areas, do you know how many people are banked?
You know what? I have those figures in my paper because we do know how many people are banked, but I do not have it offhand. But in comparison to those in the peri-urban areas and in the urban areas, it's ridiculously low. It's something like around 30% or so, which of course we could do a whole lot better. But at the same time, when you're thinking of those figures, you also have to think about a person might have been banked today and their bank goes belly up. What happens to them then? What happens to all the money? Look at what happened with BBS, what happened with Sambo. It is usually when things go wrong, it goes wrong with the people who are the poorest of the poor.
Okay. So I will lead the questioning part because I think I don't see anybody raising their hands. So as the chair, let me take this opportunity to contribute to the paper. So, okay, we have Daniel.
Yes. Hi guys, sorry. I'm actually from Nedbank, but I've been privy to this and joined your guys' meetings. I'm just interested, is there a proposal solution for this? Because my impression is that a lot of the rural community, they don't trust banks, and perhaps rightfully so. So is there perhaps a solution to build a platform to help them lend amongst each other?
Thank you very much for the question, but I should actually be asking you, because you're from a bank, what have you created to not only increase trust in the rural communities, but actually provide them with services. Because as an academic, all I could do is provide policy papers, or in this case, a working paper, and say, okay, please, this is what's needed, develop it. But it is left to startups and particularly banks, because banks have the finances to build. You build it, we'll all come along.
Yeah, I'm happy you asked, but it's going to be a bit of a disappointing answer. We've definitely looked into things, for example, like stockpiles, and we know that there's a lot of demand for it. But unfortunately, banks and I guess a lot of these companies are a little bit too driven by profit and capitalism in general. So, it's quite difficult to convince the higher ups to do something new, which is quite a high risk, product invention, let's call it, if we can't kind of prove that it's going to be very profitable for the bank. So yeah, the unfortunate reality is it's very difficult to try and get the bank to make large strides in this area, because they need to make sure that they can make fairly low risk money to make it worth their time. And just so that everyone knows, this is not my views. This is just what I've experienced.
Thank you. Actually, I have a follow-up question, and I think this is just me, because my one of my main areas is mobile telephony. So if we think about how Vodacom and MTN became essentially the giants, minus the fact that they were one of the first people, the first players, is that they were basically pushed into finding ways to provide solutions for those in peri-urban and rural areas. And as much as there was a lot of moaning and groaning from the corporates, they did it. But by doing that, they were able to increase their network. Now, surely, I would think that the banks will say, okay, well, we can't necessarily make money the traditional way, but we have to service a certain area. And it forces that innovation and create innovation in that space, which ultimately would benefit them. But, that's my 10 cents. Next question, without having, okay. Okay, you want to read the question, Chair?
Yeah, so we have a question from Gacy. She's absent.
I said we should note that she's absent at the moment.
Okay.
So you can go ahead.
Yeah, Gacy's absent. I think she's in Pretoria. But we'll talk about that after that. So the question is about how we can imagine an approach to design for different systems. Do you have any ideas about some methods or starting point, especially given equal access and power to begin with?
Yeah. Okay. That's the same. That's also going to be to you. So I'll start. You go next. Okay. I love the idea. For those who are not in South Africa, back in the 90s when MTN and Vodacom started, they had those what were they? Shipping containers that were turned into boxes that people could use to come and access mobile phones. Why can't we do that and have banking service in there? That's cheap, that's easily deployed, and that's okay. It's cheap, it's easily deployed, and it allows for you to hold on to people or make use of people who are already in the community, and that will bring up trust. If you look at countries that use retail agents, the retail agents are people who are within the communities. And so you already know who you're talking to. And that's particularly the case of things like M-Pesa and, even in parts of West Africa. So, that's something for the Southern African context we could actually look at using. But that's, that's my own bias around those shipping containers. And then I don't know if Hadassah.
Someone can request the question.
Oh, okay. I think primarily we're asking a possible design or approach to developing systems for the rural areas, or products for the rural areas, for rural and peri-urban.
So also I think we're making an assumption that what currently exists is the model that we need to bring into society. I think that's just a bit of flawed thinking as well. So before, I guess, everyone decides, okay, we've got this amazing thing that works, let's take it and bring it to rural communities. I think one of the big problems is that might not necessarily translate very well, which so far we've seen that those attempts not translated very well. And if you think about sort of Hesse you mentioned earlier, that was like a completely innovative, whether there's good things to add, so that, but that was a completely sort of like a turning thinking on the head. There's nothing that existed before. It wasn't an existing model. It was people had a need, and that particular need that they had, a product was developed for that need. So I also think, like, if banks, let's say banks, not that banks necessarily banks can solve the problem, and I think that's also we shouldn't say only banks can solve the problem, but the actual, it has to be built around solutions for people who need it, because they don't necessarily have the same concerns that other people have.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree with you that we don't necessarily have to lean on banks. And in terms of my paper, I didn't necessarily say just banks. There are different players in the space. But I think for me, at least, what's important is there should be something available, but it can't be just dumping, cell phones in an area. Do the people, are the people that you're giving a cell phone, can they use it? Is there even a network for them to log on? Does it speak to their everyday lives? So for me, it's just overall design of of the solutions that you're offering. Okay. Any other questions that I could possibly miss?
So, any other questions?
Mine is not an old hand.
Okay, so Daniel first and then Dr. Watala.
Daniel first and then, okay.
Sorry, okay, so comments as well. So the container housing, the container, I guess, store for the community members that you kind of mentioned. A lot of the banks also looked into affordable housing through these containers, but apparently the reason why we can't do it is because it's not fixed to the ground. And so there's a possibility, or it has happened, where people have actually just picked up and moved the houses overnight. So that's kind of the reason why the banks don't play in that space so much anymore. And then I just wanted to ask quickly, have you ever thought about or researched anything on blockchain solutions? I know that it does solve some of the touch points that you mentioned, which is like, for example, data issues, right? If you kind of design your blockchain system correctly, you don't have to worry too much about data. You can safely have your privacy of your data. Also, well, again, depending on how it's designed, there's not as much risk of, if a bank goes belly up, you pretty much lose all of your funds that you had with that bank. But if the blockchain system is designed correctly, then you don't have that risk anymore. But yeah, I'm just curious, have you heard of any other blockchain solutions? I will hint at Cardano if you happen to have read about it.
Should I answer immediately, or should we go to the next?
Take the second one.
Can we just answer immediately? Just because I didn't actually know about the issue about stealing the fixed containers, and it just, well, I think that kind of issue would actually have us or force us to either get more community buy-in, because at the end of the day, if you get your community to protect your containers, once they believe that's ours, they're going to make sure it doesn't disappear. Instead of seeing it as something just from the bank. But that's an interesting issue. I'm going to think more about it. In terms of blockchain, I'm not going to speak to it because it's not something I'm very comfortable with. Whereas one of my mentees, his name is Blessing Balaka, that's his key area. Hopefully we can bring him in and he can talk to this. I'm an old fuddy-duddy, so I move very, very. When you move on the periphery very, really slowly, the newer technologies, I have all these red flags, but that's just me. Next question, please.
Odilile.
Thank you so much, Chairperson, and may I also congratulate the presenter. It's a very important topic, and we need to continuously scrutinize what we have and how it benefits us. And I think the topic of financial inclusion is an important one. I just also want to, first I want to say that it's a research we also did as far back as 2016, so it was not exactly in the realm of financial tech, although it was in the banking sector as well. And I just want to know your reflection. I mean, one of the things that was really a big limitation to our research was our inability to describe a typical financial inclusiveness that can definitely affect poverty as well as income inequalities. Did you sort of reflect on that? So in short, what is it that can actually benefit the populace? And I think the best way to sort of categorize that is to look at how it can bring poverty downwards and reduce income inequalities. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. In the paper, that's a very good point. In the paper, I did not describe what financial inclusiveness would mean, but in discussions with Ogbukame in the lead up to writing the paper, we did back and forth talk about it as part of a possible wider project. So thank you for that, because we're going to make it happen. Thank you. Next question. Yes. Okay. Daniel, it wasn't really a question. It was
that's not a question. Just
a comment.
In meantime, let me just add a few, because I think this paper has a good potential and it's a very, very nice paper to look at, especially for the fact that it has a number of issues that it talks about, and more on the issues of privacy, data and privacy issues, trust issues, and the cultural context and social issues. I think if it can build on these things, it would come up to be a very, very nice paper in contributing to the existing literature on financial inclusion and exclusion. But from the topic itself, it says illusions of inclusions. And I think just adding to what the past speaker talked about, it would be nice if the paper could start by simply explaining what is financial inclusion in this particular context, so that it would become easier for one to now see if these illusions do exist or not. So I think if the paper could come from that particular perspective, it would be a very nice addition to the paper. And this would then add to your perceptions, because I think most of the things that you attribute or say in this particular paper they are not substantiated. And there is a lot of data that you can use actually to substantiate and talk about the fact that over years we have been talking about financial inclusion, and that these digital platforms such as M-Pesa and all that, they are kind of bringing the excluded into the financial space. But the question you're asking right now is that the case? For instance, if you look at the statistics, will say people that are included from the orthodox banking system in Sub-Saharan Africa would be around 29%. But if you bring in the digital platform, that rises to around 69%. So now you want to ask those questions to say, is this 69% really included or not? But this would benefit from your earlier explanation of what is really financial inclusion. So I think, and then the other issue would be now to say, are these issues really helping when it comes to poverty? And I think in explaining financial inclusion, one has to look at a lot of things. Why do we care about financial inclusion? We care about financial inclusion because it gives people to actually smooth their consumption by borrowing and saving. And if you take that into perspective, then that is the case. But I think these are not the main issues that you want to look into in this particular case, because your main aim would be to say, are these platforms that we have created, are they really talking to the people that they are being created for? Why is that M-Pesa worked in East African countries but did not work in South Africa? Is this could be because of difference in social and cultural issues? I think those are the things that would be kind of interesting in this particular paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Actually very, very helpful. I think in terms of the kind of data I use and what I was talking about in terms of the paper, because you've actually seen the paper, was I had X amount of time to have, or X amount of space to have a discussion. So now that we have a bit more time and I'm thinking things through, it just opens it up to what I could actually properly look at. But thank you very much. I've now finished all my notes, so I have no paper.
Can I add something to that? Just a thought.
Please, thank you.
That spot. In terms of, you mentioned something about in rural areas, the sort of family dynamics that play into the whole financial system. Let's say it's the man who has access to the cell phone. So I'm just wondering, like, maybe when it comes to field research, that's something that could be very important to understand around financial inclusion, how as a family financial systems are set up, because that sounds like quite a different system to, for instance, in urban areas. So that could play into it. And also, as far as I know, M-Pesa, it's not, they're trying to do something different. It's that same thing that I was saying about the bank. We have a system that works. So we go, oh, it works, let's put it here. So it's that same kind of logic that we actually need to completely new system. That's new way.
Yeah, thank you. I agree about rethinking systems, and hopefully we can get the financing together so that we can do more field work. If not, I would lean more on Afrobarometer because of the nature of the work, and they do some fantastic surveys. So dig more in and perhaps knock on their door to do a little bit more for me. Thanks.
Yeah, there's a question from Watala. It's saying this would be a broad question. Why is capitalism working for Kenyans and not so much for Southern Africa?
I'm not going to answer that. I'm going to hand it to you. You're the economist. You tell me.
Chairperson, that was a follow-up on your point where you were talking about M-Pesa. Sorry.
And this to say why is it we having some platforms such as M-Pesa working there? But I think it's an interesting question, and I think we need to look at it from a very diverse way. Because first, there is this platform that was created, and it was able to help people to initially to just send and receive money.
Yeah.
And there are a number of studies some have done, which showed that in actual fact, this platform that in M-Pesa we have, it actually allows, it's a platform that connects the rich and the poor, in the sense that for those who are living in urban areas would easily send money to the poor, and somehow that kind of increase people's welfare, especially those who are in the poor. But there was something that was created within M-Pesa, which was issues like Mushari and some other things, which now provided loans. And then that is where it gets interesting, and it now addresses your issue to say, look, here we created a platform to try to bring about financial inclusion in terms of providing people with a saving platform and a loan platform. But people are not really saving on it. They're just using it to transact in terms of sending and receiving. Why is that? In terms of loans and saving, this platform is failing. And I think those would be very interesting questions to be answered from this particular study. From Watala, do you want to say something? Okay, I think it's a legacy hand.
No,
So,
not chairperson. Oh, sorry about
in
that.
the absence of questions, we will now move into another session, which is the Tayarisha updates, and this will be given by CBC, so will give us updates on what's going on in Tayarisha.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Motobi, and thank you so much for the presentation. I think, like Daniel is saying on the chat box there, that these are usually quiet. I think I found this quite interesting because we've had more engagements around this. So it's quite a good platform for most of our students, our associates. So if anyone is interested to do a presentation on a draft piece of work they're working on, this would be a great platform for them to come through, get suggestions, particularly related to digital governance, civic tech innovation. And in relation to that, so I'm trying to link up everything. So the presentation is part of our Hanside, our foundation project, which started sometime last year. And this presentation is part of the working paper series. So we're trying to build up to our seminars, and there's going to be a book that has to come out of this whole project. So this paper is part of that. We will have at least 2 or 3 more presenters or authors from that particular project coming through to present their work. And then I just also wanted to update everyone that we have a call that's out for postdoc fellowship opportunities. So that has been shared widely with the Tayarisha community. If you know anyone, postdoc fellows that are looking to venture into the digital governance space, please send them my way. I'll also probably just put in my email address if there's anyone who needs information around what we do, and if they want to submit their applications, they can send those through to me. And then, yeah, so I've also indicated that if there are any presenters interested, please let me know. I'll send you a presenter's form, and then you can fill in your details. We set up a date where one can present their work. I'm also going to attach in the chat box the attendance register and information. So in that attendance register, you can indicate that you want to receive information about what's happening in Tayarisha. If you want to get information about possible postdoc fellowship programs that we have. So once you fill out that form for us, we should be able to give you updates on everything that we do throughout. So I think at this point, I would like to end there. If there are any comments, any questions that anyone online and in the room have, please let us know. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for taking the time to come through and have this awesome discussion with us. Thank you. Okay, thank you, colleagues. Our next lunchbox session will be in April. I'll just confirm now the date. So it's the first Thursday of the month. So we will set up another one on for the 6th of April. All that information will be shared in due course. Thank you so much and have a good day further, colleagues. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye.
I think we should be good. Yep. Nice presentation.
Thank you very much.
Your paper is nice, by the way. Hello?
I'm sorry I came late.